The stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Lang. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, I am wrapping up my review of the player cards in A Phantom of Truth with a look at the Survivor cards in that third Mythos pack in the Path to Carcosa cycle. I have split up the review, so make sure you check out the other parts for the cards in the other classes when you've got the time. There are spoilers in this episode if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, maybe consider subscribing to the channel. Now, Survivors received a lot of great cards in the Unspeakable Oath Mythos pack, so let's see if A Phantom of Truth keeps that momentum going. The first Survivor card in the pack is Madame LaBranche, Mysterious Benefactress. She's a 2-cost asset with an intellect skill icon and the ally and patron traits. She has 2 free triggers. First, if you have no cards in your hand, you can exhaust Madame LaBranche to draw 1 card. And second, if you have no resources, you can exhaust Madame LaBranche to gain 1 resource. Now, each class is receiving an ally with the patron trait this cycle, and the survivors now have a Mysterious Benefactress in Madame LaBranche. The Survivor class isn't exactly known either for its card draw or its resource generation. The only Survivor card that will draw you a card is Rabbit's Foot, and you've got to fail a skill test before you can use that. And while other classes have received a lot of cards over the past 2 cycles that either generate resource advantage or allow you to pay to play cards at a steep discount, Survivors have really been left out in the cold. Now, Madame LaBranche opens the door a crack to Survivors, but really it's just a crack. If you want a resource or a card from her, you can't have any of your own, which is really going to limit how many extra cards and resources you can generate with this ally over the course of the scenario. Having no resources or having no cards in your hand is really not a position you want to put yourself in intentionally. Most of the time, but if you're having cash flow problems in your Survivor decks, Madame LaBranche is really your only in-class option at the moment. Fortunately for Survivors, they have an entire deck archetype that centers around playing with no resources, and that of course is Dark Horse, a Survivor asset released in the Undimensioned and Unseen Mythos pack. Dark Horse rewards you with skill bonuses across the board if you're willing to play the game without resources in your resource pool. Now, if you've never played a Dark Horse deck, one of the most difficult decisions you often have to make each turn is whether to gain a resource during the upkeep phase. Now, Dark Horse does give you the option of declining to take that resource, and sometimes it's really difficult to judge whether it's the right move, given the shifting board state. Sometimes you'll take a resource with the expectation that you're going to play a card the following turn, and then you draw that encounter card during the Mythos phase, and that whole game plan suddenly changes. You have to throw it out the window, and now you find yourself in this really awkward position. You can't play the card that you were hoping to play, and you've locked yourself out of your Dark Horse bonuses, which is a pretty rotten situation. Now, Madame LaBranche takes some of the guesswork out of playing Dark Horse, because now you can always choose not to gain a resource during the upkeep phase, knowing full well you can grab a resource for free the following turn if you really need one. If you're not too sure whether you're going to need a resource to play Lucky or power up your Fire Axe next turn, no worries, because Madame LaBranche she's got you covered. She can give you that resource that you need to make that hit with your Fire Axe. Now, outside Dark Horse decks, I could see Madame LaBranche showing up in an Ashcan Pete deck. Ashcan can run low on cards, since he's usually discarding a card every turn to ready his ally Duke. She'll take some of the pressure off that, chipping in with an extra card if Ashcan runs too low of food to feed Duke. Now, you could also make a case for playing Madame LaBranche in a Minte Fan deck to help speed up her recovery should her hand get gutted by her weakness, the King in Yellow. However, that the competition for the ally slot in Seeker is probably the most fierce of all the classes in the game, and I'm just not convinced that LaBranche is going to be strong enough to crack that lineup when Min has so many options to choose from. And that really brings us to the biggest problem with Madame LaBranche, and it's neither her ability or her stat line. The biggest problem with her is the fact that she's in the same class as Peter Sylvester, and he's just one of the best allies in the entire game. I played a game with Peter earlier today, and I was just reminded almost every turn of just how good he is. Okay, Madame LaBranche can take 2 horror, great. Peter can absorb all that and then some. And I don't know how many horror he saved me in this one particular game, but it was a good 3 or 4 horror, and I just find him invaluable in so many different situations. Given the choice between the two, I'm going to be taking Peter. It's just a fact. And if I'm playing a Dark Horse deck, I'm still tempted to take Peter over LaBranche 90% of the time. He's just that good. And of course, you do have the option. You can pick up a copy of Charisma from the Essex County Express Mythos pack, and then you can have the best of both worlds. You can play Peter and Madame together in your Dark Horse deck and gain the resources and have that great horror soak. Now, survivors have only 3 level 0 allies at the moment. Of course, there's Peter Sylvester, as well as the Stray Cat, and now Madame LaBranche. And if you can't use Peter for some reason, perhaps you've shown up at a meetup with your friends and somebody else has Peter in their deck, I think Madame LaBranche is perfectly acceptable. She's got 2 health and 2 sanity. She's still relatively cheap at 3 resources, and she's going to chip in with a card or resource every now and then. I think most players are going to be getting resources out of her. I really don't like the idea of being at 0 cards, but of course there is a card. There is that weakness, Amnesia, that can just gut your hand and leave you with 1 card to work with, and Madame LaBranche can alleviate that a little bit. Now, I think if you're playing a Dark Horse deck, LaBranche is worth a look because she does give you some more flexibility. Unfortunately for her, I just think there's so much horror flying around in the Path to Carcosa cycle at the moment that Peter is almost always going to be a better choice for that ally slot in the current meta, and so I'm just not sure that the environment is right for LaBranche to really shine at the moment. The second survivor card in the pack is Snare Trap. It's a 2-cost event that will set you back 2 experience points. It has willpower and agility skill icons and the trap and improvised traits. It has the game text attached to your location, limit 1 per location. Forced, after a non-elite enemy enters attached location, exhaust that enemy, disengage it from all investigators, and attach Snare Trap to it. Forced, when the attached enemy would ready, instead discard Snare Trap. Now, hunters have been the bane of investigators' existence since the core set. There's usually at least one in every scenario, and that SOB is going to chase you around the map until you find a way to deal with it or it kills you, whichever comes first. Now, most investigators will simply kill the hunter at the first opportunity to limit the damage that it can do. But, some people enjoy playing decks centered around evading enemies rather than killing them. So, what does the card pool offer them? Hunters are really the nemesis of those types of decks because they tax their actions so heavily because you're constantly having to evade the same enemy turn after turn. You really need to try to stay one step ahead of the hunter or find a way to slow it down. Otherwise, it's just going to chew up your precious actions turn after turn, which is going to prevent you from advancing your win condition. And eventually, you're just going to run out of time because the agenda deck has advanced, or you just end up dead. Now, there is a spoiler ahead, so if you don't want to be spoiled about a Phantom of Truth, turn this off now, because I'm going to talk a little bit about that scenario. Now, Phantom of Truth ups the ante, because every enemy in that scenario has the hunter keyword. Every enemy is a hunter. So, odds are extremely high that you're going to end up with 2 or 3 enemies chasing you through the streets of Paris in that scenario, and you've really got to have a plan to deal with them at that point. Now, I love playing decks based around the evasion mechanic in solo, so I'm always on the lookout for new solutions to the hunter problem. Now, survivors do have a few options to deal with hunters as well as those enemies that end up getting moved by cards in the encounter deck. Although right now I don't think any of them are the ideal solution that I've been looking for. First off, you can use a card like Close Call, the level 2 event from the core set, to shuffle a non-weakness, non-elite enemy back into the encounter deck. This is really the only way to remove a hunter from the board, albeit temporarily. There's always a chance that it can rear its ugly head again. Obviously, a Close Call works better if you're playing with a larger encounter deck, say in a scenario like where Doom awaits, where I think you've got 35, 40 cards to work with. So the chance that that hunter is going to show up again is pretty remote, as opposed to some of the other encounter decks that we've seen where the cards, you've only got 15 to 20. So chances are high that hunter's coming back. Bait and Switch, a survivor event from the Dunwich Legacy Deluxe expansion, lets you move a non-elite enemy to a connecting location after you evade it. If you're playing an evasion-based deck, you can use this card to give yourself a little bit of breathing room. You know that hunter's not going to resume its chase until the enemy phase of the following turn, which gives you 3 actions to put some distance between you and it. Alternatively, if you're playing in multiplayer, you can also use Bait and Switch to push the hunter to a location where another investigator can dispatch it for you. Now, there's also Hiding Spot, which is a survivor event released in the Path to Carcosa Deluxe expansion. That will make an enemy that moves into your location aloof for a turn. When it enters your location, it becomes aloof. And this prevents it from attacking you, though. It prevents it from attacking you, but it also prevents you from evading it unless you take an action to engage it first. Unfortunately, Hiding Spot is discarded at the end of the enemy phase if there is a ready enemy at your location. So you're probably going to need to evade the hunter the following turn. So it's not the most ideal solution to dealing with enemies that are moving into your location. And I'm speaking primarily here about hunters because they are the most common, although I should remind you that there are enemies that are moved, can move around the board due to effects from the encounter deck as well. Now, there is also Lure, which is a survivor event released in the Essex County Express Mythos pack. Now, I've always considered Lure to be one of the weakest cards in the game, although that may change with the release of a Phantom of Truth. I've played that scenario a few times now, and I can certainly see a few situations where Lure might be useful. The biggest problem with Lure, of course, is that it's so scenario specific, so it's difficult to include in your deck. It does have the 2 agility icons, though, so perhaps if the scenarios in the Path to Carcosa cycle seem to have a lot more locations in them, so maybe this is Lure's time to shine. You never know if you're trying to evade enemies. So along comes the latest solution to the hunter problem, and that is Snare Trap. If a non-elite enemy sets off the Snare Trap, it becomes exhausted, and it's not going to ready until the upkeep phase of the following turn. And so the trap prevents the enemy from attacking you for 2 turns, and it gives you 6 actions to hunt for clues, play assets, or just plan your escape before that hunter moves again. The ability to pin a hunter down for 2 turns is really strong, and it should give you and your fellow investigators plenty of time to deal with that enemy or make your escape. You might even consider combining Snare Trap with Hiding Spot to keep the latter card in play for a couple extra turns, since Snare Trap will keep it exhausted and keep your Hiding Spot in play. Now, I've had a chance to play Snare Trap in my Pacifist Wendy deck, And it worked out really well. I was really hoping I'd be able to recycle them using Wendy's amulet, since it is an event after all. Unfortunately, the encounter deck conspired against me, and I was only able to trap one hunter with it. But it did, when I did trap that hunter, it did give me plenty of time to reposition myself in that scenario and avoid. I don't think Wendy got attacked once in that entire scenario, because she was simply able to just maneuver around the board using cards like Snare Trap to avoid the enemies. The only issue I really ran into with Snare Trap is that it only traps one enemy at a time, which can be pretty annoying when you've got multiple hunters bearing down on you. Now, you do get to choose which enemy gets snared, so you can certainly use that to your advantage and pick the one that is least favorable for you. One thing to keep in mind if you are playing a deck centered around evasion, that events like Coast Call and Snare Trap can be a little pricey, especially for survivors who tend to run a little bit more resource poor than other classes. I mean, they did just get Madame LaBranche in this pack, their first resource generating card. So you've got to make sure you're generating enough resources to play them consistently. I play 2 copies of Lone Wolf in my from Blood on the Altar in my deck, just to shore up her resource generation, so I can play events like Snare Trap and Close Call. Of course, LaBranche might also be an option if Peter, Sylvester, and Cat Burglar just weren't so damn good. Those allies definitely take precedence over her. You know, it always brings a smile to my face whenever I picture Cthulhu hanging upside down beside a tree, you know, a rope wrapped around one of his pseudopods, him like dangling there like a rabbit. Unfortunately, Snare Trap only works on non-elite enemies, which is a shame, you know, considering how many elite hunters there are in the Path to Carcosa cycle. But don't let that non-elite clause prevent you from spending experience on this card. If you're struggling to deal with hunters or other enemies that are moving around the board due to effects of the encounter cards, Snare Trap is a great solution, and it's going to give you plenty of breathing room to reposition yourself and get your game back on track. That's going to do it for my look at the Survivor cards in A Phantom of Truth. Survivors do okay in this pack. The designers have been pretty stingy when it comes to level 0 allies for the Survivor class, so it's nice to see them receive another one in Madame LaBranche. Her abilities have a very Survivor feel to them, you know, doing less with more, or doing more with less is the Survivor theme, and Madame LaBranche certainly doles out the cards and resources very, very slowly. If you're looking for a little bit of extra resource generation in your Survivor decks, she's really your only in-class option at the moment. Now, I hate comparing her to a card like Peter Sylvester, because she's just not going to measure up to him. But really, Peter is in a class all his own, so it's really not a fair comparison. I think as the meta shakes down a little bit more and we get more cards and more archetypes, I think Madame LaBranche is going to find a home in some deck. Maybe it's Dark Horse. You know, maybe that deck already exists. It's just up for the players to decide whether the resource generation she provides is better than what some of the other allies offer. As you probably know, I'm pretty fond of Snare Trap, but I also happen to enjoy playing decks that rely on evasion rather than fighting to get by. You know, my Pacifist Wendy deck, for example, doesn't try to kill anything, not even a rat if I can help it, and it's quite fun to play. But hunters are a big problem in that deck, and finding a solution to them is something I'm looking at. And I don't think Snare Trap is the perfect solution to that problem, but the ability to lock that enemy down for 2 turns is very powerful. The fact that you drop this down at your location and the enemy doesn't get to fight you, it doesn't get to do anything, it just gets to sit there exhausted for 2 turns. That's incredible. In some situations, I think it's even better than discarding the hunter with a card like Close Call if you can lock it down rather than discard it. because at least with Snare Trap, you know where that enemy is, and it's not going to surprise you later on during the scenario. So yeah, some really interesting cards for the survivors in this pack. And overall, I think this pack is solid. There are some cards I'm not entirely taken with, but I think there's certainly enough cards in this pack that are interesting to experiment with. It's just going to depend on sort of where players want to take the game and whether those cards will find a spot. I'm really hoping the Guardians see a little bit of love in the last three Mythos packs of this cycle. They haven't really gotten anything that screams build a deck around me, and Seekers of course always do well. Rogues look like they're getting some really interesting toys coming up here, and of course the designers always like to look after the survivors, so no worries there. Mystics, I really hope we don't see another card that adds charges to assets in the next Mythos pack yet again. Hopefully we can get off that train and explore some new territory. Overall, yeah, I'm happy with this pack, and I've already enjoyed playing with Snare Trap, and I'm looking forward to playing with some of the other cards as well. That's going to do it for my look at the Survivor cards, as well as the entire A Phantom of Truth Mythos pack. If you enjoyed this review, I'd appreciate it if you could leave me a thumbs up. It helps out the channel a great deal. Leave a comment down below if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Make sure you hit that subscribe button to be notified of when I release future content, and do check out the Path to Carcosa Deluxe expansion giveaway that's going on right now. Get that entry in, and win yourself a box of Path to Carcosa, so you can join in on the fun of this campaign. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromlang@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromlang. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.